shot itself in the foot. We have a wealth of guests to help us unpack all of it, but first let's bring you right up to date with the news. Here's Polly Middlehurst.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just after midday and I am Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. Our top story: the Prime Minister will travel to Eastern Europe next week as part of efforts to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Downing Street said Boris Johnson's determined to accelerate diplomatic efforts and he's going to speak to President Putin on the phone. He's set to consider a range of options to discourage Russian military aggression, including bolstering NATO defences. Speaking to GB News earlier, former Defence Secretary Ian Duncan-Smith urged the European Union to stand up to Russia.
If they invade Ukraine, I think it is a threat to the way we live our lives. It is a threat to NATO. This is a democracy. It's a country that has the right to free choice. We've been giving them arms. I wish the rest of the European Union now would actually back up what the UK and America are doing.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Well, Boris Johnson could see the results of the highly anticipated Partygate inquiry as soon as this weekend. The long-awaited Sue Gray report is looking into alleged lockdown parties at Downing Street and Whitehall. It comes as police deny delaying its publication, confirming their inquiries haven't been escalated to a criminal investigation, adding the timing of the report's release is solely down to the Cabinet Office inquiry. Scotland Yard also confirmed it's now received all evidence requested to complete their investigation.
Solicitor Dick has shown quite clearly here that she does not lead, she follows. Her judgment has been woefully inadequate, and this is yet another huge failing on her behalf.
Peter Blexley, former Scotland Yard detective there. Now, a major overhaul of the highway code comes into force today, and there are concerns that millions of drivers are simply unaware of the changes, which are aiming to boost protection for cyclists and pedestrians. New guidance means traffic will have to give way when pedestrians cross at a junction, and cyclists should also prioritise riding in the centre of lanes on quieter roads to make themselves more visible.
141 cyclists were killed on the roads last year, more than 4,000 injured. Some 5 people every day actually die on the road. So it's trying to say, look, the roads are there, they're there to be shared.
Edmund King of the AA. Police have arrested a man accused of racially abusing the former England footballer Ashley Cole. The incident reportedly happened when Swindon Town played Manchester City early this month during an FA Cup third-round tie. Cole, who played for Arsenal and Chelsea, was part of the broadcast pundit team. Wiltshire Police have confirmed a 24-year-old remains in custody. Older people may have to go without food or heat this winter as energy bills continue to rise. That's according to Age UK. Nearly a quarter of people over 65 say they'll be forced to choose between heating their homes or buying food if bills increase substantially, whilst more than half think they'll have to heat their homes less because of inflation and the soaring cost of living. Entertainment news, and the US singer Joni Mitchell has asked the streaming site Spotify to remove her music over COVID misinformation concerns. The Grammy award-winning musician says the site was allowing irresponsible people to spread lies that were costing people their lives. Earlier this week, fellow singer Neil Young removed his own back catalogue from Spotify, reportedly due to its hosting of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, which has been known to air vaccine-sceptical views. A beach in the Gulf of Thailand has been declared a disaster area after an oil spill from an underwater pipeline. Around 50,000 litres of oil has leaked into the ocean, spreading across an 18-square-mile area and blackening the sand. The Thai Navy is working with Star Petroleum Refining Public Company Limited, who are behind the leak, to clean up the beach and try to contain the mess. 15 ships, along with a number of aircraft, are working to contain the spill at sea with booms while spraying chemical dispersants. Sport, and Ash Barty has won the Australian Open women's singles title. The world number one recovered from 5-1 down in the second set to clinch victory over first-time Grand Slam finalist Danielle Collins. She's become the first home player for 44 years to win an Australian Open singles title. You're watching GB News and listening on the radio. We'll have more news as it happens. Now more from Alastair Stewart and friends.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, including our big question of the day, national insurance has hit the headlines this month, but is it more about politics than it is about public health? We all know about the potential hike in the last budget. The money is earmarked for the NHS and ultimately, eventually, if a little bit is left, for care. But with the upcoming rise in the cost of living, we'll discuss if the country can afford it. Plus, the highway code is changing from today with 8 new rules. It's hoped they'll offer better protection to pedestrians and cyclists, thousands of whom are killed or seriously injured on Britain's roads every year. But not everyone's taken kindly to the changes. And that long-awaited Sue Gray report will be delivered to Boris Johnson soon. It's such a flexible word. She's doing so without waiting for the police inquiry to conclude. The police have asked for minimal reference to be made to events that they are looking at in order to avoid any prejudice to their investigation. But first, national insurance. I've long thought that the NHS is the black hole of public spending. It sucks in everything and nothing escapes. It needs reform and it needs challenging. But right now, I'm told it needs money. It has, of course, done sterling work during the pandemic, but at the cost of horrendous waiting lists in virtually every other area of medical activity, from cancer to transplants. In his budget last year, knowing what was coming down the track, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak decreed a 1.25% rise in national insurance for this year. Workers and employers. Kicks in April to raise £12 billion for the NHS and, as I said a moment ago, at some distant point in the future, social care. But what's now developed, beyond the debate over the needs of the NHS, is a fascinating political argument. Not so much about the 12 billion as about whether national insurance or some other means of raising money is the best way to do it. Now, the Tory right and left are unusually agreed that NI isn't the best way forward. Two folk that I count as friends and politicians of some wisdom, Robert Halfon and John Redwood, agree that it's not the way to proceed. Robert, who's what they call a blue-collar Tory, a working-class man who really should vote Labour but doesn't, says a rise in national insurance will hit the poor hardest. He argues instead for a rise in capital gains tax, a levy on businesses, or even pushing some of the money saved from cutting overseas aid towards the NHS. Sir John, a traditional right-winger, says the rise in national insurance isn't needed because the economy is growing faster than expected and borrowing was much lower than expected in December, some 13 billion. So if the NHS does need more money, John suggests that it can be found elsewhere. Now, the significance of that is that two good men from both wings of the Conservative Party agree a straight rise in NI isn't a clever move. Add to that the small matter of both the Prime Minister and his party plumbing low levels in the opinion polls that are usually associated with an imminent departure, and there is much food for thought. It seems to be the consensus that whatever finally comes of Partygate and the rest of it, and if the Prime Minister survives, a new battle plan is required, and scrapping or delaying the national insurance rise is on the agenda. Ministers are rolled out to defend the rise and say it will happen, but they yet may prove to be the fall guys and gals in a bigger game. Save the NHS, save Boris Johnson. So today we're asking first if the NHS needs the money, why it needs it, what it would spend it on, and if there should be conditions attached to it. But we're also asking if all it tells you is really more about the state of the Conservative Party than the NHS. Lord Frost mentioned his opposition to a rise in NI, indeed any rise in taxation, when he resigned from the Cabinet. Mel Stride, the Conservative chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, is also against it. And David Davis, the Conservative MP who famously said to Boris Johnson, "For God's sake, go," is in the opposition camp too. As the Times leading article says today, and I quote, "A battle is underway to define what it means to be a Conservative." Top guests, including Sir John Redwood, will tell you what they think. I'll tell you what I think later. But as always, I really want to hear what you think. Email those thoughts to gbviews@gbnews or go on to Twitter or Facebook or any of the other social media platforms. Also, send me your questions that you want to ask my guests as well. It really matters. We want to look into the NHS, your tax and national insurance, and of course, ultimately, your government. So let's get underway with Richard Vaughtry. Richard's a regular on this programme. He's a GP and former chairman of the British Medical Association's General Practitioners Committee. Richard, good to see you back. I hope you're well. Let's start off with the absolute basics. What does the NHS need an extra £12 billion for?
I think almost everybody recognises that the NHS has worked incredibly hard over the last 2 years responding to the pandemic, but whilst doing that, hasn't been able to do some of the routine things that we would expect to be done. Many of the operations, many of the procedures, many of the regular reviews that we do for patients have sadly had to be postponed, but they still need doing. And as a GP, I see in my surgery every day of the week patients who are waiting far too long for hip replacements, for knee joint replacements, for eye surgery, a whole range of different procedures. That needs doing, but at the same time, we need to keep doing everything else as well. So we do need extra resources to be able to get rid of this backlog that is affecting so many people.
Let's unpick resources. First and foremost, staff shortages are a problem, but there are a few out there waiting to be recruited. Say, oh yeah, I'll come and earn a bit of that 12 billion quid. And if you're going to train new doctors, nurses and the rest of them, that takes time. I don't see how 12 billion solves any of that on the staff front.
Yes, it is a major problem. So the workforce has been underinvested in for many, many years. And the pandemic has shown that whilst the workforce that we have works incredibly hard, we do need more doctors, nurses, support staff right across the NHS and in general practice too. But additional resource to provide additional capacity, whether that be Saturday, Sundays, evening clinics, surgery appointments. We saw this over a decade ago, when there was huge waiting times, and the government then did create additional capacity at the time, again with a national insurance price to fund that. But we did see the waiting list drop dramatically by doing additional procedures on top of the extra work that the NHS continues to need to do.
Are you convinced there's a willingness to do all of that over time? And frankly, for people who hold our lives in their hands, I don't want them overworking. I don't want them doing too many hours just for money.
Yes, no, I think there is a recognition that this is urgent work that needs to be done. No one wants to see our patients waiting too long in pain or discomfort or with uncertainty and fear because their procedures or their appointments have been delayed. Everybody wants to get on with this, but we need that extra capacity to be able to do that, and we need the resources to support it. But we also need to recognise this is just the first bit of the jigsaw. We also, as GPs, see regularly the impact that our patients have when they're wanting to get support in care homes or home care, and the real financial concerns that they and their families have about that. So again, we need the government to act on their promise to resolve the problems in social care too, because that affects the NHS as well.
Final point, do you think the taxpayer is entitled to say to the government and through the government to you, men and women running the NHS, that if you're going to get extra money, then we demand targets, we demand efficiencies, and we demand outcomes? A bit of a clearer contract, quid pro quo.
Yes, well, we've seen that over the decades where additional funding has been provided with an expectation that that delivers outcomes. And the NHS recognises that. We want to see our patients treated as quickly as possible. We want to see the care that they've been waiting for far too long to be delivered. And we expect to be able to do that, but we need the resources and the commitment to be able to do so.
Richard, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, and do stay in touch with us. That's Richard Vaughtry there, a GP and former chair of the BMA's General Practitioners committee. Joining me next to share his thoughts is another good friend of this show, Julian Jessup, an independent economist who used to work at the pounding heart of Her Majesty's Treasury. Always good to see you, Julian. As Richard Vautry just said, waiting lists and staff shortages do make the need a slam dunk, but he said it would mean overtime and extra facilities because training took so long. Do you think the need is there and that it's a way of spending money well?
Well, I think in the short term, yes. I mean, clearly we've had a massive shock with the pandemic, and that's led to a large backlog of NHS work. So there's a one-off cost there that needs to be paid for in some way. As it happens, I think it would be perfectly reasonable to add that one-off cost to long-term borrowing rather than raise taxes. For example, if you lived in a block of flats and the roof needed repairing, you wouldn't expect every single tenant in that block of flats to pay all of the costs up front. You'd spread it over time. And I think that's the right way to look at that. There is another debate to be had, though, about the longer-term future of the NHS and indeed health and social care, and whether the current proposals for raising taxes are the right way to fix that. But for now, at least, I don't think it's necessary to raise taxes to fund that. And also, I think it's premature. There's never a good time to raise taxes, but now is particularly bad because the economy is only just recovering from the COVID pandemic. There's the cost of living crisis. And I think it'd be much better to add the cost here to long-term borrowing or allow stronger economic growth to pay the costs rather than increasing taxes straight away.
Yeah. You say that you're pro-borrowing rather than national insurance. John Redwood, who's coming on the programme at the end, has said with those borrowing figures back in December, 13 billion better than expected and good growth, real growth in the economy, then general resources can do it. You don't actually need to borrow more. It's there.
Well, on this, I entirely agree with him. If you had to borrow more, then I'd be happy to do that. But in fact, you probably won't, because the economy has recovered more quickly than expected. People are actually already paying more in tax. So, wages are up, profits are up, spending is up. So the Treasury is already getting more money from the taxpayer because of the benefits of economic growth. So it doesn't need to add to that by topping up tax rates as well. And as you said in your introduction, this isn't just a tax that hits employees. Actually, most of the money initially would come from businesses, and they will inevitably pass that on to all of us in the form of lower wages or higher prices or less investment. So this is a pretty damaging tax, I think, at exactly the wrong time.
OK. One of the points that Richard Vautry also made, GP but former chair of the BMA, who've had their own run-ins with the government over recent times, I thought it was an intriguing concession. He said, we would be willing to accept targets, outcomes, a more contractual arrangement if more money came into the NHS. He said, as has always been the case, I'm not sure that is true. I mean, I think as a taxpayer, if I was going to be giving X more but knew certain things would definitely happen by a certain time, I'd be much happier.
I think that's right. The problem with the NHS, of course, is that it is potentially a black hole. It will swallow up however much money that you throw out to it. And there's a contrast here between the NHS, which obviously is state and publicly financed, with healthcare systems elsewhere in Europe and much of Asia, where there's much higher levels of private sector funding and provision. And those healthcare systems are much more successful. And this problem tends not to arise because the market decides what operations are going to be done, where the priorities lie. If it's just decided by bureaucrats in Whitehall or even doctors with the best will in the world, they're not necessarily going to allocate resources in the most effective way. So if you are going to go down the public funding route and taxpayers being expected to pay more, you need to get some sort of checks and balances there to make sure the money is spent well. And that's something I think in the past has often been missing.
Yeah. Two final quick questions. I made it clear, you used to work at the Treasury, you're a civil servant in those days, you are an independent economic commentator, and that's an important couple of caveats to throw in before I ask you, to what extent is this really a battle for the heart of the Tory party, as the Times leader says? They're trying to work out what they really think about spending and tax.
Well, I am worried about that. I mean, this should be a decision based entirely on economics, not politics. And there are probably some people who, politically are arguing that national insurance should be cut because it would bolster the fortunes of the government. I think that's wrong. Equally, there are suggestions that the Prime Minister is now determined to go ahead with the increase because it will reassert his authority. And I think that would be wrong as well. So I think it should be about economics rather than politics. But it is important symbolically. I mean, is this going to be a country or a government that thinks that the solution to any problem is to increase government spending and to finance that with increases in taxes? Or is it going to move in a more sort of liberal free market direction where the emphasis instead is on boosting economic growth, using the benefits of that to fund increases in public spending, but also keeping taxes low? And I, as a sort of free market economist, would far prefer the latter.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the final one, and I'm being told in my ear very loudly, it has to be quick. How much wriggle room does Number 10 leave itself when it says all over the papers today, no ifs, no buts, NI is rising?
Well, not a lot, but we've seen plenty of U-turns in the past, particularly over the last 6 to 12 months. So it does make it harder to change tack, but not impossible.
All right, Julian, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for your economic thoughts and your economy of that answer there at the end. They've stopped shouting, which is a good thing for both of us. See you soon, I hope. Thank you very much indeed. Julian Jessup there, former Treasury man and now independent economic advisor and consultant. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've lots more coming up on today's programme, including rules for all types of road users will be updated in the Highway Code by the government starting today to improve the safety of our roads. Our reporter Alice Porter will be joining us to discuss it. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
So looking ahead then to this afternoon, and the UK looking windy with gales for the northern half of the UK and rain clearing south. Looking at the detail, Saturday afternoon rather cloudy and mild across the southwest of England, a fresh westerly wind, spells of rain and drizzle. The moors also seeing a fair amount of low cloud shrouding the summits. A cloudy afternoon for London and the southeast, drier than further west, windy with highs of 12 to 14. Cloudy, wet and windy in Wales, particularly in Cardiff, although clearer skies not far away. Staying mild, highs there of 9 to 11 Celsius. And then looking further up the country to Manchester and the northwest, it's going to be windy with sunny spells and showers, a risk of gales over the moors, so take care on those busy roads. A similar story for northeast England, where strong and gusty winds will make for potentially difficult driving conditions, especially through the first part of the afternoon. Dry with sunny spills there. And a windy afternoon for Glasgow and the central belt, with temperatures lower than those in the day, thanks to the cold air moving in on the strong northwesterly wind. And moving across to Northern Ireland, a similar picture there for the afternoon, with winds having weakened somewhat after their morning peak, sunny spells and scattered showers and highs of 8 or 9 Celsius. So winds gradually weakening then into this evening and rain in the south, clearing into the channel. And that's how the weather's shaping up today.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 25 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. The Highway Code is changing from today with 8 new rules. It's hoped that it will offer better protection to pedestrians and cyclists, thousands of whom are killed or seriously injured on Britain's roads every year. But these changes have not gone down well with all motorists. As promised, our reporter Alice Porter is live for us at London Bridge.
Hello there. Yes, the Highways Code is being revamped from today, and one of the major changes to it is there's going to be a new hierarchy for road users, and that means those who are deemed to be more risky or more dangerous to other road users now have a greater level of responsibility. So what that actually means is if you're an HGV lorry driver, for example, you are seen to be more dangerous on the roads, you pose a greater risk to other people, so you need to take more responsibility than a cyclist, and a cyclist needs to take more responsibility for a pedestrian. So that's one of the key changes that we're seeing that's coming into effect today. Another one is that there's now going to be priority for pedestrians at junctions. So if I was driving in the car, and it's the same for a cyclist, if we both reached a junction and somebody wanted to cross the road, we need to stop and allow them to have right of way to cross over. And another thing that's coming into effect today, or an encouragement that the government is wanting us all to do, is the Dutch Reach, which, if you've never heard about it, don't worry, I hadn't heard about it either. The Dutch Reach is it's coming into effect because there's so often cyclists are killed when people open their doors. So the temptation is, because I'm on the right side of the car, to use my right hand to open the door, okay? So if I go like that, the problem is I often don't look out, and cyclists come and they can hit the car door, and so many are injured or killed every year on our roads. So the plan with the Dutch Reach is to use your hand on the other side. So in this case, I'm on the right side of the car, so my hand on the opposite is my left. By using my left hand to open the car door, it's quite awkward, and it sort of pushes me to move my head to look up, and if I go like that with my left hand, I have to look up and look out, and it's a way of checking and forcing you to look up and look out to check to see if there are any cyclists coming past. So those are some of the changes. We've got other changes coming in. You need to give 1.5 meters to bikes when you're a motorist and you're overtaking. And I was speaking earlier today with Duncan Dollimore. He's from Cycling UK. He's head of their campaigns, and he was telling me a bit more about what these changes mean for cyclists and motorists.
What we've done is followed the situation that most of Northern Europe has. We now have a single rule for junctions without traffic signals, which is if you're turning left, you give way to something going straight ahead. That means if you're driving and turning left in your car at an unsignalised junction, you give way to the pedestrian that's crossing the road or the cyclist in the cycle lane that you're cutting across. That's the principle behind it. And it impacts cyclists as well, because the cyclist turning left now has to give way to the pedestrian that's crossing the road. Best way to think about this is to imagine that huge bell-mouth forecourt entrance that you might have to a petrol station, where you've got sort of 40 metres to cross. Perhaps you're a mum with a pram and you're pushing it across, and somebody drives into that, and you have that moment where you wonder whether you're supposed to break into a trot and get out of the way of the driver. What this rule says is, no, you're crossing, the driver is supposed to give way to you to allow you to cross that junction.
That was Duncan Dollimore speaking to me there, head of campaigns for Cycling UK, giving a really important picture there of how this is going to impact motorists and cyclists. But if you've been watching this today and you've been thinking, well, I didn't really know anything about these changes coming into effect, then you're not alone. The AA did a poll very recently which showed 1 in 3 motorists had no idea that these changes were coming into effect today. And I think that has been quite concerning for a lot of people, because some of this is guidance, but some of this is legal requirements. So if you're unsure about the rules, whether you're a cyclist or a motorist, it is worth checking the highway code. I know that's something many of us haven't perhaps looked at since we've done our theory driving test, but it's worth looking at because some of this is in relation to the law. Other aspects of it is guidance, and some of this has actually just clarification of things which have already been into effect. So, for example, I've seen quite a few newspaper articles sort of saying, oh, cyclists are going to be 2 abreast from now. That's going to be a real problem. Well, actually, in some situations, cyclists could be 2 abreast. That's been in place before today, but there's just been extra clarification that in some situations, if it's safe to do so, particularly if there's an inexperienced cyclist with them like a child, it may be better to do that. So that's really, really important. But there are some significant changes coming in today, but others say it doesn't go far enough. For example, there's no mandate that there needs to be a cycle path. There needs to be a cycle path that lots of people have spent their taxes on having cycle paths in different areas, and at the moment there is no mandate for cyclists to use them. So some people say they don't go far enough in that regard, and others say this is going to cause a lot of animosity at junctions between cyclists, drivers and pedestrians.
Alice, brilliant and informative as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Make sure you put your seatbelt on before you drive off. And thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Alice Porter there, our London correspondent, with all you need to know about the highway code. But a totally serious point, as Alice said. Some of it's legally binding, some of it's advisory. Do look it up online and have a look. And the other key thing is whether you're in a motor car or on a bicycle, or they also get a shout out on a horse. It's about mutual respect, so watch out for horses if you live in the countryside as well. Now, you've been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, national insurance rises. Is it more about politics than our public health? I really do want to know what you think about it. Is it the thing that you're most concerned about, or are there other issues, as Julian Jessup was saying a moment ago, that really get your gander, as it were? Let's start off with a few now, because we've had so many, and then we'll put some more out later on at the end of the programme. And we'll get underway with Deborah via Twitter, who says, I am very concerned about energy prices. I look after my bed-bound mother who has Alzheimer's, and she needs to be warm, yet we can't keep the heating on for her. I wrap her up as much as I can. Well, our best wishes to both of you, and do your best to stay warm there. Terrible story to hear, but I know, sadly, not uncommon. Alison also got in touch via tweet. My husband has just received the new costs for our new energy charges. As from April, they're going up 150%. We only have my small private pension and his pension, which isn't massive. I don't know how we're going to manage on top of everything else. Well, there's two, both of them energy, and we picked those two because it gives you a kind of sense of where we're going with this argument. But you lead it as well, and we'll follow you, because GB News is all about you. Keep your thoughts coming through, and I'll be reading more of them later on. You are indeed watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon, including the all-important Sue Gray report. But what are the legalities of it all? All that to come, but first let's bring you up to date with all of the news. Here's Holly Middlehurst.
Thanks, Alistair. Just after 12:30, our top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister will travel to Eastern Europe next week as part of efforts to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Downing Street says Boris Johnson's determined to accelerate diplomatic efforts, and he's going to speak to President Putin on the telephone. He's set to consider a range of options to discourage Russian military aggression, including bolstering NATO defences. Boris Johnson could also see the results of the highly anticipated Partygate inquiry as soon as this weekend. The long-awaited Sue Gray report that Alistair referred to looks into alleged lockdown parties at Downing Street and Whitehall. It comes as police deny delaying its publication, confirming instead the investigation hasn't been escalated to a criminal one. And also, as you've been hearing, a major overhaul of the highway code comes into force today amid concerns millions of drivers are unaware of the changes. The new rules aim to boost protection for cyclists and pedestrians alike. Older people might have to go without food or heat this winter, according to research by the charity Age UK. Nearly a quarter of people say over 65s will be forced to choose between heating their home or buying food if bills increase substantially. And the US singer Joni Mitchell has asked the streaming site Spotify to remove her music over COVID misinformation concerns. The Grammy Award-winning musician says the site was allowing irresponsible people to spread lies that were costing people their lives. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. We'll have more Alastair Stewart and friends after the break.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 1, couple of minutes short thereof, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Now, the much-anticipated Sue Gray report is due shortly. It has been imminent. It has been any moment now. It has been next week. But currently, it's shortly. As we've heard many times before, but some facts about the parties at Downing Street might be redacted from that final report. Redacted means blacked out with a great big felt tip pen, so you, I and everybody else can't read it. On Friday, the Metropolitan Police released a statement saying that certain details would be omitted from the report to stop possible prejudicing of current police investigations. The police, however, stringently denied delaying the actual release of the report. So, much to talk about politically and much to talk about legally. I've got a QC coming up in a moment, but first let's get the conversation underway with an old mate of mine, Joey Jones. Joey will be well known to you from his days at Sky News and as a former advisor to Theresa May. He has been at the pounding heart of these battles before, and I'm delighted you found time to join us this afternoon, Joey. Good to see you. This has become an utter shambles, but who do you think it's hurting most, Number 10 or the Met?
I think nobody's coming out of this well at the moment in terms of the build-up, if you like, to the publication. Ultimately, the damage from this particular period for Downing Street could well be dwarfed by the impact when it actually comes out. So I think that of the two parties that you identify, it's probably the Met that have more questions to ask themselves at the moment as to how they've allowed themselves to get into a situation where there's so much cynicism, so much anger, and so much, if you like, sort of conspiracy theory that's built up around the idea that Cressida Dick and her colleagues are doing everything that they can to get the Prime Minister out of jail free, if you like. And I think that could have been avoided quite easily just by being a bit more transparent and a bit more upfront about the reasons behind their decision making.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be talking to Edward Henry, the QC, about exactly that point when we have finished our conversation. But I could take you a step back into that very crisp analysis as well. The Prime Minister stands accused in several of the papers of colluding with the Met to thwart Sue Gray. Given your experience, is that bonkers or is it actually possible?
I don't believe that. I don't think that is plausible. I think that it's abundantly likely that the Prime Minister would do anything that he possibly could to diminish the impact of the report. And I think we're right to be sceptical or cynical, indeed, about suggestions that it could be heavily redacted, because that would be evidently to the Prime Minister's benefit. Myself, I actually think that from the Met perspective, the likelihood is that, I mean, I remember reporting, as you will, Alistair, on the whole Labour Party cash for peerages investigation that was a total fiasco for the Met. They built it up into this mass. There were dawn raids on Tony Blair's close Downing Street aides. There was a suggestion that this was going to bring down the government, and it just was a complete damp squib and a humiliation and really damaging to the Met's overall reputation at that time. I think they were scarred by that. I think that's why there was no appetite for getting into this sort of investigation at the outset. Now that they have, though, they need to be far more transparent as to what they're doing and why.
Yeah, I mean, talking of the briefing operation, and I do remember the Tony Blair cash for peerages thing very, very clearly. And I tell you, the other thing I remember about it was that the briefing from Number 10, Campbell's operation, was Rolls-Royce by comparison with this. I mean, this briefing operation, whatever the rights and wrongs of the case are, the briefing operation's been all over the place. As I jokingly said in the introduction, soon, imminent, next week, maybe Monday. I mean, for God's sake, the Prime Minister's future could hinge upon this, and they can't even get the messaging right.
Well, I imagine they're all in a state of panic. There will be a substantial number of very senior people who are anticipating that they are being lined up for the chop by the Prime Minister in the aftermath of this report coming out, because it's clear, it's absolutely clear that some people are going to end up being scapegoated, if you like, or at least having to recognise that somebody has to be accountable for this mess and for the very bad decisions that were taken under lockdown. In that sort of a situation, with a sort of circular firing squad atmosphere, it's not that surprising that they can't get their comms act together. But you're right. I mean, it's very ugly. And for anybody on the outside, I mean, it is. You would think that this would be the worst possible situation the Prime Minister could find himself in, and yet he's trying to drag it out. It's actually the current situation, bad as it is, probably feels to Boris Johnson better than the likely aftermath of the publication of the report.
Yeah, it is intriguing. And we, on this occasion, we won't get into the merits of military action, whether it be Ukraine or Belarus, and start talking about Margaret Thatcher and the Falklands, because that's another couple of hours of intriguing conversation. But what I do want to ask you about, finally, and it's with reference to those two hats that I mentioned in my introduction to you, Joey. A top-class political correspondent for Sky News, get in there, get the story, beat the opposition, and an insider who worked for Theresa May. What do you make of the flow of leaks to the media, whether it was the Allegra Stratton mock press conference or pictures and stills of parties that took place, unidentified, no caveats, being fed through to the media? Has that been an amazing scoop, or is there something profoundly wrong about it? Because Joe and Joanna Public aren't totally happy with it.
I think that in many respects, given the number of people that were involved in behaviour that I think 90% or more of the British population just think was outrageous, I think it's astonishing that it took so long to come out. And it's astonishing, to be honest, that the stories around these parties didn't come out. It didn't have to be leaked, really, just through normal conversation that takes place between Downing Street aides and journalists over the course of many, many months. I think that right now, the leaking and the systematic nature of it is a reflection of the fact that Boris Johnson has no history of showing loyalty to the people closest to him when he gets into a scrape. Far from it. He has always looked to somebody else to carry the can for things that you might feel that he should be accountable for. In that situation, if you were somebody that held incriminating or damaging information about the Prime Minister or about other colleagues, why would you feel duty-bound to hang on to it? I think that's one of the big differences between this Downing Street regime and those that have preceded it.
Fascinating, and thank you for your candour as well as your experience in that answer, Joey. Great to see you. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for breaking into it to spend time with me here on GB News. You take care. Thanks. Joey Jones there, former Theresa May supporter, worked for Theresa May in Downing Street, but also deputy political editor of Sky News. Now, as Joey said, and indeed as I said in my introduction to these two conversations, forget the politics for a moment, because there's a great deal riding all of this quite legally. So I'm delighted to welcome back to the programme a good friend of this programme, and there he is with all of his wonderful books, but no wig on. But that's entirely a matter for him, because he is a QC and is entitled to wear it. It is the great Edward Henry, who is Regulation and Criminal Law Specialist at Mountford Chambers. Can I ask you first of all, Edward, what is it that the Met are really worried about legally?
I'm not sure, Alistair. It's quite perplexing, because if this is just about a retrospective investigation, which they said they didn't do into COVID regulations, then it's completely inconsistent with what they have done in the past. I mean, where they've said, in respect of this case, we're not interested, not a matter for us, nobody's made a complaint. Oh, you've made a complaint, well, there's no evidence. Oh, let Sue Gray do it. And then Sue Gray's report is just about to be published, and they've decided that they now will investigate it, and then they want to censor it. So I can't quite understand what's going on. People have said, well, they don't want to prejudice their own inquiry. But if it's in respect of magistrates' court proceedings, which we call summary proceedings, then it's almost impossible to get a contempt of court. If it's to do with concoction
Edward,
yeah.
Let me just stop you there briefly for a moment. Crucial point, because you and I both know exactly what that means, because I'm a professional journalist and you're a professional lawyer. The prejudice bit is stuff appearing in the newspaper or on television and radio that a jury might hear and then think, oh, well, he clearly is a wrong one because I read it in the Daily Mail or the Times. And that is irrelevant in this case.
It is irrelevant in this case unless, as a former DPP, Lord MacDonald, said, there is something in the background that we do not know. Such as, for example, was there something more... Now, this is entirely hypothetical. Was there something more than drink there? Drugs, for example. Or was this actually a case of misconduct in public office, which I think is really rather remote because of the Met's historic nonchalance and lack of interest in investigating.
How extraordinary. I hadn't thought of that one. I'll tell you the other thing I read somewhere else and made a note of it because I wanted to ask you about it. And that is, if somebody, and again, nobody's been found guilty yet of anything or charged with anything at all, but if somebody, particularly a staffer, is found guilty of something and is dismissed for whatever they've done, forget what the magistrate does, forget fixed penalty, but is sacked for whatever he or she did. Somebody said to me, well, you know, it's been such a shambles, they may have grounds for judicial review.
Well, they might have grounds for unfair dismissal because obviously the culture is set at the top. And it appears that in the very highest echelons of the Prime Minister's staff, this was being countenanced. And leaving aside whether the Prime Minister was aware or had encouraged it, I'm not qualified to speak about that. But from what we already understand, this was countenanced and positively encouraged by, for example, Martin Reynolds.
Yeah. So, final point then. Joey said that politically it had been pretty shambolic. The messaging was all over the place, and that was for that side of it to worry about. As a QC looking at it, from the Prime Minister asking a senior civil servant to make an investigation, the Met reading a first draft. Don't worry, it's happened to me before. I know exactly. I'm glad you did that. Last time it happened to me, I put them on the desk and we just carried on, and it was just fine. And the first draft of the Grey Report is then shown to the Met, and the Met then say, hang on a minute, there's stuff in here that might be quite sensitive. Is there a better way whereby this could have been done, which would have been slicker, more efficient and more watertight?
Well, I think if the Met had investigated at the beginning, that, of course, is a counsel of perfection with hindsight. But I think the real problem here is that the purpose of the report was to allay public anger at this apparent hypocrisy that there was one rule for government and one rule for the rest of us. And it was also to enable the legislature, MPs, to hold the government to account. And both of those purposes have now been completely and utterly frustrated, completely, because this report now is going to come out in a diluted, censored form. And the Prime Minister, of course, worked in the media. He knows about the news cycle. And it may be that this has been a godsend for him because it will allow it to be kicked into the long grass, and then people will, as it were, their anger will assuage over time.
We'll talk again when it comes back and when we finally get to read it. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed for that clarity. And what a great pleasure it is. Your son or your grandson?
No, this is my son. But it's an understandable mistake, Alistair.
Yeah. I'm even more impressed with you, Edward. Very best wishes to both of you and have a lovely weekend. Thank you for breaking into it for us here at GB News. Thanks, Edward.
Thank you so much.
Edward Henry, QC, Regulation and Criminal Law Specialist at Mountford Chambers, and very proud dad. What a wonderful thing. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends and Children of Friends. Lots more coming up on the show this afternoon. Competition and Markets Authority is studying the music streaming market. I'll be joined by a very good friend to get his thoughts on the way we access music, who has the real power, the artist or the big company, and what are Neil Young and Joni Mitchell up to with Spotify? But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
So looking ahead then to this afternoon, and the UK looking windy with gales for the northern half of the UK and rain clearing south. Looking at the detail, Saturday afternoon rather cloudy and mild across the southwest of England, a fresh westerly wind, spells of rain and drizzle. The moors also seeing a fair amount of low cloud shrouding the summits. A cloudy afternoon for London and the southeast, drier than further west, windy with highs of 12 to 14. Cloudy, wet and windy in Wales, particularly in Cardiff, although clearer skies not far away. Staying mild, highs there of 9 to 11 Celsius. And then looking further up the country to Manchester and the northwest, it's going to be windy with sunny spells and showers, a risk of gales over the moors, so take care on those busy roads. A similar story for northeast England, where strong and gusty winds will make for potentially difficult driving conditions, especially through the first part of the afternoon. Dry with sunny spills there. And a windy afternoon for Glasgow and the central belt, with temperatures lower than those in the day, thanks to the cold air moving in on the strong northwesterly wind. And moving across to Northern Ireland, a similar picture there for the afternoon, with winds having weakened somewhat after their morning peak, sunny spells and scattered showers and highs of 8 or 9 Celsius. So winds gradually weakening then into this evening, and rain in the south clearing into the Channel. And that's how the weather's shaping up today.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 4 minutes to the top of the hour. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, this week, the Competition and Markets Authority has launched a study into the music streaming market. Streaming has changed the way that we listen to music. In the UK, more than 80% of recorded music is now listened to via a streaming service. The study will look at how well that market's working for us, the audiences, whether innovation's being stifled and if any firms hold exclusive power. That's down the road. Also at the same time, one of the great big streamers, Spotify, is in conflict with some of its great big artists like Neil Young and this morning we hear the great Joni Mitchell. So what's going on at Spotify? Are they in trouble? Or are they going to ride the crest of the wave as ever? Delighted to be joined by my good friend and friend of this show, UK artist manager Nick Stewart. I'm going to start actually with Neil and Joni. I mean, is this about freedom of speech or is it about money?
It's about money. It always is about money, Alistair. But the interesting point about this is these aren't two hereby fly-by-night artists. These are two of the greatest songwriters and singers of the past 50 years, and they carry considerable clout, and they may well, their work, I suggest, may well last longer than Mr. Rogan's. I understand that Mr. Rogan has a very large sum of money was paid to him to put out his views on Spotify. And of course, the interesting part is that Spotify was originally a DSP, a digital streaming platform for music, and then they got into the business of purchasing, and that's what they've done with Mr. Rogan, purchasing podcasts that have enormous reach across the globe. Well, if you do that and you have people on that artists violently disagree, you're going to get some conflict. And this is what's happening. Now, Niels Lofgren has gone on Twitter this morning. He's standing firmly behind Neil and Joni. He's pretty close to Bruce Springsteen. You know, if Taylor Swift or Lana Del Rey suddenly decide to, I'm not suggesting they're going to, by the way, but if they did, Spotify, whose stock share price dropped 22% in January, right? It's quite a lot of money, okay? They could be in a certain amount of trouble. And, you know, it could really be a big problem for them.
I suppose the other big problem that there could be for them is that if you don't like it, because like me, you're addicted not only to Joni Mitchell, but to Blue, one of my all-time absolute top albums, you can just leave, unsubscribe.
No, you can't, apparently. And that's another thread on Twitter today, which is a lot of people are trying to leave Spotify and are being told that they can't because I suspect, actually, the system is close to crashing. I mean, that is I should actually say allegedly, because I've not tried to do it myself, but there's a whole thread coming off Twitter at the moment saying that people who want to get off Spotify are not being allowed to. So the other thing, of course, you can do is you can go and buy Blue or any of the other albums you want physically, or you can go to 9 other DSPs led by Apple Music and Tidal and others, and get it there. So they don't have Spotify don't have by any means a monopoly on streaming. In fact, it's interesting that Apple and Tidal and Cubase and these companies are now spending a lot of money marketing their wares.
Yeah. Final quick one then, given what your last answer there about the others like Apple. Ironically, the Competition and Markets Authority may have little work to do anyway, because the guys are going to go in there and pick up business that Spotify have lost, and suddenly it'll become a lot more competitive.
Well, it will. It's interesting. I mean, Andrea Caselli, who is the CEO of the CMA, said, over the past decade, the music industry has evolved almost beyond recognition. 80% of all music now is streamed, and a market study will help us understand these radical changes. They're going to look at things like Apple's, Google's privacy sandbox, Facebook's use of ad data, Apple's App Store. There's a company called TCAT, which is in the process of setting itself up as a highly effective digital auditing system, which will get into play here big time. So there's going to be quite a lot of movement in this area, and the Spotify spat is only going to get bigger.
Fascinating. Nick, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. The great Nick Stewart there, UK artist manager, a good friend of mine and a good friend of the programme. It is now 1 minute past 1, and you're watching Alastair Stewart here on GB News TV and radio. Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. Hello and welcome back if you've been with us since 12 o'clock. The time is now 1.5 minutes past 1, and I'm Alastair Stewart, and we are into the last hour of the programme. I'll be keeping you company here on TV and on radio. And we have got plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion, that expected national insurance rise. No ifs, no buts. Is it more about our politics, however, than our public health? We'll be hearing what you think, and you'll have my take this hour. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. And here is Polly Middlehurst.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. Just after 1 o'clock, and your top stories this hour. The Prime Minister will travel to Eastern Europe next week as part of efforts to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Downing Street said Boris Johnson's determined to accelerate diplomatic efforts, and he plans to speak to President Putin on the phone. He's set to consider a range of options to discourage Russian military aggression, including bolstering NATO defences. Speaking to GB News, the former Defence Secretary Ian Duncan-Smith urged the European Union to stand up to Russia too.
If they invade Ukraine, I think it is a threat to the way we live our lives. It is a threat to NATO. This is a democracy. It's a country that has the right to free choice. We've been giving them arms. I wish the rest of the European Union now would actually back up what the UK and America are doing.
Ian Duncan-Smith. Well, Boris Johnson could see the results of the highly anticipated Partygate inquiry as soon as possibly this weekend. The long-awaited Sue Gray report is looking into alleged lockdown parties at Downing Street and in Whitehall. It comes as police deny delaying its publication, confirming their inquiries haven't been escalated to a criminal investigation and that the timing of the report's release is purely down to the Cabinet Office inquiry. Scotland Yard's also confirmed it's now received all the evidence it needs to complete its investigation. Former advisor to Theresa May, Joey Jones, thinks police should evaluate their own conduct in this situation.
Probably the Met that have more questions to ask themselves at the moment as to how they've allowed themselves to get into a situation where there's so much cynicism, so much anger that could have been avoided quite easily just by being a bit more transparent and a bit more upfront about the reasons behind their decision making.
Joey Jones. A major overhaul of the highway code comes into force today, and there are concerns millions of drivers are simply unaware of the changes which aim to boost protection for cyclists and pedestrians. New guidance means traffic will have to give way when pedestrians cross at a junction. Cyclists should also prioritise riding in the centre of lanes on quieter roads to make themselves more visible. Edmund King, president of the AA, spoke to GB News earlier about the changes.
141 cyclists were killed on the roads last year, more than 4,000 injured. Some 5 people every day actually die on the road. So it's trying to say, look, the roads are there, they're there to be shared.
Older people may have to go without food or heat this winter as energy bills continue to rise. That's according to Age UK. Nearly a quarter of people over 65 say they'll be forced to choose between heating their home or buying food if bills increase substantially, whilst more than half think they'll have to heat their homes less because of inflation and the soaring cost of living. Scientists say they've made a breakthrough in understanding why some people with long COVID suffer particularly with breathlessness. A pilot study by researchers at Oxford University have used a special medical gas called xenon to identify lung abnormalities that aren't picked up during routine scans. The small study, involving 36 volunteers, showed oxygen wasn't being transferred into the bloodstream as smoothly as in regular people. A larger, more detailed study is underway to confirm the results and to better understand how to treat the issue. And as you've been hearing, the US singer Joni Mitchell has asked the streaming site Spotify to remove her music over COVID misinformation concerns. The Grammy Award-winning musician says the site was allowing irresponsible people to spread lies that were costing people their lives. Early this week, fellow singer Neil Young removed his back catalogue from Spotify, reportedly due to its hosting of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, which has been known to air vaccine-sceptical views. Winds of up to 80 miles an hour are expected across Britain as Storm Malik hits over the weekend. Amber weather warnings have been issued for Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland, with the Met Office warning the storm could damage homes, power lines and transport. We'll keep you up to date on that one. Sport, and Ash Barty has won the Australian Open women's singles title. The world number one recovered from 5-1 down in the second set to clinch victory over first-time Grand Slam finalist Danielle Collins. She'd become the first home player for 44 years to win an Australian Open singles title. Congratulations to her. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now more from Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thanks, Polly. I am Alastair Stewart, and until 2 o'clock I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, we all knew about the national insurance hike in the last budget. The money's earmarked for the NHS. But with the upcoming rise to the cost of living, we'll discuss if the country can afford it. In around an hour, you'll be hearing my take on our main discussion today on national insurance and if we can afford it. Plus, from Monday, care home restrictions will be eased following the successful rollout of the booster vaccine. Governments say that the move will finally allow care home residents to see more of their families and friends. But with care homes being short-staffed, can they deal with an influx of visitors? And we have a fantastic person to speak to today in our Good Causes segment. Stefan Simonovic is the founder of Take One, Leave One. He wants to ensure that there are warm winter clothes for the homeless people on every high street. GB News is all about you, our viewers. Any burning question or stories that you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small, we genuinely want to hear them. So get your voice heard by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk, and do please put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. Now, Health and Social Care Secretary Sajid Javid's confirmed that from Monday, care home restrictions will now be eased following the successful rollout of the booster vaccine. Governments say that the move will finally allow care home residents to see more of their families and friends. Here's what he had to say.
It's always about getting the right balance between making sure visitors can come and people can be properly looked after, but also that the patients and people in care homes are as safe as possible.
However, care home providers have been critical that the guidance that supports the measures will not now be released until next week. I'm delighted to be joined now by Simon Walls, who's the clinical lead at St Cecilia's Care Home in Scarborough. As I said, Simon, I mean, it looks great on paper, but does the lifting of restrictions actually confuse the situation as far as you, your staff and indeed your residents are concerned?
It certainly makes it very difficult, Alistair. The issues we have is this came out on Wednesday or Thursday of this week, and all of a sudden we're expected to open our doors to unlimited visitors on Monday. We've got 44 residents maximum in our home, but there are homes that are a lot bigger. And like you say, and rightfully say, the staffing crisis in social care hasn't gone away. So there's them increased stress and strain on the homes to manage this safely and effectively.
And is it really about getting your staffing levels back up to where they were before the restrictions came in? Or is it also about, do you whether still have to wear masks or not, or whether you have to have PPE and the rest of it? What are the real immediate challenges that you face, Simon?
Yeah, it's pretty much the guidance on it all, Alistair, and I think they've almost said we're going to leave it to individual homes to do and to make their own minds up of it, but that's not really the way that we want to work. We need some guidance and guidelines on what to be expected, the minimum to be expected of us. We warmly welcome the visitors back in the home, and we think it's going to make a massive effect on our residents, obviously on our staff, and especially on the residents' families who haven't been able to see them as much as they would like to have done, and most recently. So it is that strain, and yes, but social care has been understaffed for years and years. COVID has made it far worse, and we've got no recognition from the government. And the fact they bring it out on midweek of last week, and then expect us to roll everything out and be ready for Monday is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting listening to that answer, Simon. There will be other people listening to our conversation as well who they didn't like the idea of lockdown. They certainly hate the idea of restrictions, and the idea of saying to someone like you, a professional, a manager, a leader, just get on with it and go and do your own thing. They will welcome that. It's intriguing, I think, to hear you say, no, it's important because it's about health and care that we know what we can do and what we can't do.
Well, yeah, because if you say that it's in individuals' homes' choice, you're going to have some residents' families that are going to miss out, or some that are going to be perhaps admitted unsafely or perhaps visited unsafely. As much as you can do and as much as we can do to welcome visitors, we warmly welcome it, Alistair, but it's got to be done safely. COVID hasn't gone away. COVID is still with us, and it's still rife. There are people still dying from it. And the people that we look after are sadly the people that are really at risk.
Do you think that they've just jumped the gun then? And are there people that you can talk to? I mean, I'm not sure you can pick up the phone to Sajid Javid himself, but there are lines of contact through the local authority right up to the Department of Health and Social Care. Have you got that contact? Have you got that conversation going?
Yeah, there's local government and there's the CCG that's local that you can get information from, infection prevention help as well, and they've all been fantastic. It's just the fact that it came out as a bit of a bullet to us, and then it's on Monday, by the way, you're starting all this again. We're hoping to be out of lockdown on Monday, Alistair, because we've had a breakout of COVID within our home, albeit very small and staff only. But even the guidance on that is starting to change. It's coming from 28 to 14 days, which is fantastic, providing that it stays at that point. And it's just, I just think we need more guidance. We need more people to actually say, this is what you can do. This is what you've got not to do. So everybody's singing from the same song sheet instead of just even saying, oh, it's your own decision.
Yeah, a fascinating balance between freedom and responsibility, which is at the heart of so much of this. Simon, I wish you well and your staff, and with due respect to you and the staff, even more importantly to your lovely residents. And let's hope that COVID thing gets out of the way soon and it's back to normal with clear guidance ASAP. Thanks for finding time for us this afternoon.
Thanks,
Simon Walls. Simon Walls, who's the clinical lead at the St Cecilia's care home in Scarborough. Now, it's time for our Good Causes segment of the show, where we shine a spotlight on an individual or a group of individuals who've gone above and beyond to make the world just a little bit better. And my next guest is someone who wanted to ensure that there were warm winter clothes for the homeless people on every high street. Yesterday, Take One, Leave One marked its 4th anniversary with launches in London, Leeds, Manchester and Brighton. And I was alerted on social media by my next guest that it was going on because he knew I had an interest in this area of activity. And that guest is Stefan Semanovic. I hope I've got the pronunciation right, Stefan, there, have I?
Very good, Alistair. Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's a great result. 4th anniversary. Tell me about the basic idea and where it came from.
The basic idea is an incredibly simple idea, and that's partly its beauty, is its simplicity. You just put a sign out anywhere you are, somewhere central, which says, if you're cold, take one. If you can help, leave one. And that concept of taking and leave one, you say where it comes from. It's as old as time, the idea of helping one's fellow man. The fact that if you've got 2 coats and the man next to you has no coat, you offer him your coat. So that very simple idea of helping each other came, to me, I came across it on social media, on Twitter. Someone had done it in Dallas, Texas, outside a taco shop, had put up a sign, put up some warm clothes. And I thought it was in 2018. It was just when that beast from the east, do you remember that very cold winter was coming along?
Indeed.
And I thought, why don't we do that in London? And I put one out outside my office in London, in Exmouth Market, with the sign, a rail of warm clothes. I got my colleagues to come and donate clothes. I checked with all the shopkeepers, and I said it will be there for 2 weeks in the run up to Christmas. In the end, it stayed for 3 months, and it came back the next year and the next year and the next year. And then the idea spread. People would see it on social media, and they would think, well, we could do this. Anyone could do this. And that's part of the beauty. You could do this right now. You could take some clothes, make your own sign, or these signs that you see are ones that you can buy for £30, or we can give you one for free. If you contact Adelphi Graphics in London, they'll send you one, or contact me, take one, leave one. We're on Twitter, lots of hashtags, Instagram, etc. So, and a website as well. So,
yeah, I get a bit like that on the social media, but I'm sure they will find it. You say about you can get one for 30 quid, or they can get in touch with you, and you will kindly send them one, and the rest of it. One thing that I find intriguing, being relatively active in the voluntary sector with a number of good causes, you're not a charity as such, but equally you're not a business as such. How does it work? Is it essentially something that hinges upon word of mouth?
Well, it's an idea. It's a sticky idea, and a sticky idea will spread the same way. So the woman in Texas who set up the one outside her taco shop was originally from Mexico. She had seen the idea in a subway driving through Mexico City, where someone had just put up metal nails in under the subway saying, if you're cold, take one. If you can help, leave one. So an idea like this will stick. Now, I'm an activist, a campaigner, so I've turned it into a bit of branding. But again, there's no business, there's no charity, there's no organization. It's just an idea that anyone can do. And you can do it right now, as I say. One of the key things as well is also teaching people is that, look, you don't have to wait for anyone else to do this. You can do whatever you want to do right now. And it working with charities now, as you say, we made an announcement yesterday. So I've had an idea of expanding this idea because it's worked very beautifully. We've had over 100 Take One, Leave One rails across the country. And in fact, it even went back to America, back to Canada, across the Atlantic. But the idea now is to approach all the heads of the big charities, the homelessness charities. And I know, Alistair, you're a goodwill ambassador for Crisis, which is why I contacted you. But if every charity shop can put a little Take One, Leave One rail outside their shop, they have clothes, they have a few spare warm coats, they have staff. So this is the idea that we can get a Take One, Leave One stall. And these aren't just for homeless people and not just for rough sleepers, but they're for anyone who's feeling the hardship, anyone who's feeling the need can help themselves. No questions asked.
Yeah.
And it's a very beautiful, very simple idea.
Yeah. Despite that, and neither of us live in cloud cuckoo land, quite the opposite, I noticed in response to your tweet and my warm response to your tweet, there were antagonisms as well. Scroungers just taking whatever they can get. Do you just ignore that, or do you take it on?
I mean, one of the things I've seen, and because people would worry about what will happen if you do this, won't people just take it if they don't need it, and criminals will come and all the rest. Now, what happens is this can happen. These aren't policed things. Some of them especially over COVID, over the last year, have had to be, you can't say manned, but they've had people watching them the whole time. But most of the time, the ones I left out, I'd take it out in the morning from my office, I'd take it back in the evening, and it would replenish itself. Like a miracle, it would fill with clothes. All the local shopkeepers, all the local residents would give, and the local homeless people would come. And it actually also served to break down some of those barriers, those invisibility barriers for homeless people who live in our communities, who are often looked straight over, walked straight past. So that was one thing. It didn't create a problem with homeless people coming and affecting the shopkeepers. It actually helped shopkeepers. And in fact, it enhanced the environment. And not many people, I'm sure there were a few people who would take the clothes and not, who weren't in need of them. But I think it's self-policing, and generally people will not take if they understand the concept. The other bit of antagonism that we get is people saying this is disgraceful that this is even needed in the country which is one of the biggest economies in the world, that we should even need to be doing this. And I think this is another aspect of Take One, Leave One. It is inherently political because there shouldn't be homelessness in this country. And we saw during the COVID pandemic, we managed to get every homeless person off the street within a matter of months. So what is needed to get rid of homelessness is the will to act, some political action, so government action. And you can see in Finland, with their strategy of homelessness first, or homes first, they managed to eradicate homelessness completely. So it's not a utopian ideal. No. This is something that can be done. And Take One, Leave One is very much just a sticky plaster.
It helps it along the way, but finally, final observation, and kind of you to mention my connection with Crisis, but as we always say, there are other brilliant homeless charities as well, Mungo's and Shelter and all the rest of them. But one of the key things about Crisis is it's also about trying to get homeless people an address, giving them a way back into society so that they can get a job and they can stop being homeless rather than also just needing a coat for the time being. And I think we're all totally committed to the basic idea is get them back into society, back working, back paying taxes, and then they won't need your rails. Do you agree with all of that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is about tackling the roots of the problem. And as I say, Take One, Leave One can be criticised for just being a sticky plaster. And we whenever I talk about it, I talk about the bigger political issues and the fact that homelessness shouldn't be existing. And the fact it's not just about homelessness, because you're talking about the cost of living, you're talking about the insurance hike coming up. This is affecting lots of people who can't afford to just keep warm in the winters. So I think inherently it's very political, but it's something that we can all do. I think that this idea that we can actually work with charities, because you're asking about, well, what if people want to donate? I say to people, look, if you want to donate to Crisis, donate to Shelter, Centre Point, St Mungo's, etc. If you want to buy us a banner, send £30 to Adelphi Graphics, and that's great as well. And the idea with going to every high street, if, say, for example, Crisis or Shelter were to put a Take One, Leave One rail outside their shop with a little warm jacket and gloves and scarves and hats, that could be a separate money earner, because we could ask people from Take One, Leave One to donate directly to Crisis, Take One, Leave One appeal. Stefan, we wish you well. I think it's a great idea. Leave others to make their own minds up, but we both think it's a good idea, so I wish you well with Take One, Leave One, and happy 4th anniversary. Thank you for finding time to talk about it. Cheers, God bless. Great idea to not so much combat homelessness, although, as he said, it's an issue whether you're left, right or centre that is in need of being dealt with, but for the time being, keeping ordinary fellow human beings warm. Not a bad idea. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll be speaking to a royal commentator regarding the latest with the Prince Andrew case. Plus, Her Majesty is set to release a condiment line that includes ketchup and brown sauce. There you go. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
So looking ahead then to this afternoon, and the UK looking windy with gales for the northern half of the UK and rain clearing south. Looking at the detail, Saturday afternoon rather cloudy and mild across the southwest of England, a fresh westerly wind, spells of rain and drizzle. The moors also seeing a fair amount of low cloud shrouding the summits. A cloudy afternoon for London and the southeast, drier than further west, windy with highs of 12 to 14. Cloudy, wet and windy in Wales, particularly in Cardiff, although clearer skies not far away. Staying mild, highs there of 9 to 11 Celsius. And then looking further up the country to Manchester and the northwest, it's going to be windy with sunny spells and showers, a risk of gales over the moors, so take care on those busy roads. A similar story for northeast England, where strong and gusty winds will make for potentially difficult driving conditions, especially through the first part of the afternoon. Dry with sunny spills there. And a windy afternoon for Glasgow and the central belt, with temperatures lower than those in the day, thanks to the cold air moving in on the strong northwesterly wind. And moving across to Northern Ireland, a similar picture there for the afternoon, with winds having weakened somewhat after their morning peak, sunny spells and scattered showers and highs of 8 or 9 Celsius. So winds gradually weakening then into this evening and rain in the south, clearing into the Channel. And that's how the weather's shaping up today.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's a couple of minutes short of 1:30, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. There have been many twists and turns, but it was reported this week that Prince Andrew wants to stand trial by jury against sexual assault allegations, which he absolutely denies. It's been claimed that the Queen has decided not to pay any of her son's legal bills in the continuing case. Even the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St Andrews, that the Duke of York had been affiliated with, has ended its association with him. So what does it all mean for the royal family? And could the timing coincide with Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee next year? I am delighted to be joined by a very good friend of mine, the royal commentator, Robert Jobson. Robert, good to see you. I'm just going to hold this up on the assumption that not everybody reads the Telegraph, although the other papers are full of various developments in this. For those listening on radio, it is a picture of a lawyer of the Duke of York and also of Miss Giuffre, and it says Virginia will accept a settlement only if it vindicates her and holds Andrew to account. Robert, has she blinked?
I don't think so. She's been pretty consistent in that respect. She's saying that she wants to be acknowledged, that he knew her, that he met her, and these things happened. I can't see him actually doing that, because to do that goes against everything that he has said. But he has point by point through his lawyers, 41 points, said issued denials to everything that she claims. And as it stands, they're both standing head to head, really, and not giving an inch. Now, that's normal, I think, Alistair, in a case where it could end at the last minute with a settlement. But at the same time, I've read a lot on this case, and I remember before this was even brought that a judge dismissed a lot of her evidence, Virginia Giuffre's evidence, and said that it wouldn't stand up in a criminal case. So this is a civil case. This is all about money. And essentially, he's not going to spend any jail time, whatever happens. So the reality here is, it's not a cut and dried case. And I must admit, when talking about this case, it slightly alarms me. I think in this country we are guilty until, innocent until proven guilty. And in this case, it seems that everyone is assuming, because of a Newsnight interview that didn't go particularly well, to say the least, and the people that he associated himself with, that Andrew is guilty. Now, and the fact that all these things have been stripped of him, that again, adding to it. I think there's other reasons for that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that thought. And it crossed my mind again. There's another spread, I think it's in The Sun, saying that Prince Andrew is trying to point out that in his version of events, it was Kevin Spacey who brought Ghislaine Maxwell along to the party, I think it was at Windsor, rather than him, trying to separate himself from someone who has been convicted. That's quite important.
Well, the other thing is that a lot of broadcasters, ITV, our old friends there, did a documentary quite recently about this. And I thought it was quite alarming that one of the people they quoted as a source, an intimate source, and gave credibility, was a former static protection officer, Paul Page, who had served 6 years in prison for fraud. I thought that was extraordinary, that he was given any credibility at all, given that the lives he'd ruined was a £3 million fraud. So, it's almost like anything you can say about Prince Andrew at the moment because of what's happened. And he hasn't actually said a word in court yet. I'm not defending his judgment. I'm just defending the idea of you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. And defending good journalistic practice as well, about which we both agree 100%. You mentioned source in passing. You will forgive me for the most outrageous segue from sources as in journalistic sources to sources as in Balmoral. Is it Balmoral doing... Her Majesty's gone into the condiment business. Hurrah for her!
I once remember talking to a friend of mine who was a source, a royal source, and it was helpful. And I used to call that person HP. So I think this was quite a very interesting development, that the Queen has gone into selling sauces, ketchup and brown sauce, we should call it, brown sauce at Sandringham. Now, I think this might be less to do with Her Majesty, actually, than more to do with the fact that the Prince of Wales is now running the farms up at Sandringham, and we know that he's quite clever at the way that he can commercialise this. The farm at Sandringham has gone organic as well since the Duke of Edinburgh passed, and has been dealt with by Prince of Wales. So I'm sure it's lovely, but it's about double the price than most people would probably want to spend.
Yeah, but he knows perfectly well from Highgrove that they don't mind that at all for the label. I mean, Highgrove could give Sainsbury's a run for its money at the moment.
Well, he did sell a lot of Duchy Originals was eventually sold for a lot of money which went to charity, we should stress, to Waitrose, I think, to handle. So I think that there'll be people wanting to buy it. Absolutely.
I'm not at all.
I could do with a few more sauces myself. Tell them that's
Hot dogs by appointment to Her Majesty, mustard and ketchup purveyors. Robert, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Robert Johnson, royal commentator, author, and friend of mine and friend of this programme. So you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon. You'll hear my take on our big discussion today. Is the national insurance hike more about politics than our public health? Plus, we'll take a look at what you at home have been sending in. All of that next, but first, let's bring you right up to date with the news headlines. Here's Polly.
Alistair, thank you. It's just after 1:30. I am Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. And your top stories today. The Prime Minister will travel to Eastern Europe next week as part of efforts to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Downing Street says Boris Johnson is determined to accelerate diplomatic efforts and plans to speak to President Putin over the phone. He's set to consider a range of options to discourage Russian military aggression, including bolstering NATO defences. Also today, Boris Johnson could see the results of the highly anticipated Sue Gray Partygate inquiry. As soon as this weekend, a long-awaited report looks into alleged lockdown parties at Downing Street and Whitehall. It comes as police deny delaying its publication, confirming the investigation hasn't been escalated to a criminal one. A major overhaul of the highway code has come into force today. Amid concerns, millions of drivers are unaware of the changes. The new rules aim to boost protection for cyclists and pedestrians. And older people might have to go without food or heat this winter. That's according to new research by the charity Age UK. Nearly a quarter of people over 65 years old say they'll be forced to choose between heating their homes or buying food if bills do increase substantially. And the Canadian singer Joni Mitchell has asked the streaming site Spotify to remove her music over COVID misinformation concerns. The Grammy Award-winning musician says the site was allowing irresponsible people to spread lies that were costing people their lives. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News and we'll have more from Alastair Stewart and friends right after the break.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 22 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, television and radio. We've been chatting about the proposed national insurance rise today in party disagreements with the internal party disagreements with the Conservative Party, whether it should go ahead, and indeed the need for the NHS to receive funding as a result of it. I'm delighted now to discuss both of those with the Conservative Member of Parliament for Wokingham, Sir John Redwood. John, always a pleasure to see you and thank you for finding time for us. The NHS first and then the real punchy stuff on fiscal policy. You suggest that if the NHS needs more money, there's no need to raise tax on national insurance to find it. But first of all, in your view, does the NHS need more cash?
Well, I think it will do over the next 2 or 3 years, yes. I think it needs to recruit more nurses, doctors and other medical staff.
because we still seem to be a bit short of capacity, and we need to spend more on training. I think we need to make sure they have reasonable increases in wages and salaries. I think we do want to make sure we can recruit and retain. And I think we need to widen recruitment within our country, because we have been rather over-dependent on trying to get people in from abroad. So we need to spend a bit of money on sorting all those good things out. And that should be a progressive increase, as the NHS has been enjoying in recent years without special taxes.
Come with clearer strings and performance targets rather than just, as the charge goes, cash just chucked at it because the doctors and nurses tell us they need it. You'll get the money if you do X, Y and Z by such and such a date.
Well, I think that's right. Well, I think the way I would put it is that ministers need to have really good management information coming from the chief executive of NHS England and the equivalents in the other parts of the United Kingdom. And they need to satisfy themselves that those general chief executives they've appointed are getting full value for money and are directing the money to the places where they really need the extra cash and the extra resource and the extra people. And one of the things I always found when I was helping run parts of the public sector was it was very bad at stopping things that didn't need doing anymore and redirecting those resources into the newer things or the areas that were short. And so we've got a lot of winding down to do in the general health area after the pandemic, because we won't need all the same resource going into new vaccines and vaccine rollout once everybody is vaccinated, and most of us are now. And we won't need this massive test and trace system. We need to wind that down and just use testing where essential, where people are ill and you're trying to find out what the right diagnosis is. And so there will be big offsetting savings from the one-off costs of the pandemic, which can be redirected into frontline care.
Oh, fascinating. An interesting, a beautiful segue into the next bit. So it may not be that they need 12 billion. You accept that they may need some money, but there are all sorts of bits within the existing budget that may go to help because they won't be spending it. Let's just bank that, because that's a very interesting thought. On the national insurance issue, and you've been very clear about this, I've read your pieces both online and in print. Remind folk at home why, in your view, the national insurance rise, even if money is needed, is simply the wrong way to go about raising it.
Yeah, I do think the NHS will need it, and I'm not querying that it might end up at 12 billion. Indeed, by past standards, that's quite a modest sum of extra money going into the NHS. What I said when I voted no to the increase in the first place, and what I've doubled up on now I've seen the way things turned out, is that the Treasury and the Office of Budget Responsibility were wildly too pessimistic in their forecast of how much money would be brought in the current year from last March from the taxes we've already imposed. And I'm pleased to say I was right and they were hopelessly wrong. And so far this year, since March last year, they found another 60 billion lower deficit, mainly more revenue coming in from existing taxes, than they were forecasting at the time. And I don't know why they are just so dreadful and why they wallow in their pessimism and tell people like me I'm wrong, when year after year, they were about 90 billion wrong the previous year, they grossly underestimate the revenue from existing taxes, and then they dare to tell us we need to impose a new tax because they're so wrong on their forecasts of what they're collecting.
Yeah. Is it also overtly political in the sense that something that you don't, as the government that is formed by the party that you support, as it were, not your government because you're a minister at the moment.
Well, I try to support, but not all.
occasionally difficult. But folk out there are going to be facing very largely increased energy prices. And we've had more emails complaining about that this morning, this afternoon, John, than we have, funnily enough, about the national insurance issue. But the national insurance thing is something that as a sensitive government that's under some pressure at the moment, does have direct control over. So for purely political reasons, isn't that a powerful argument for just scrapping it as well?
Well, of course. Well, when I voted with a very few other Conservatives against it in April, March, there were two very good reasons. One was it was a flagrant violation of the Manifesto Pledge. And the second was that I was very sure they'd underestimated the money they were getting in, so in those terms they didn't need it. There are now been two additionally very good reasons added as to why we should abandon it immediately. And the first big one is that people are going to be hit by a massive increase in gas and electricity bills, far bigger than I or anybody else was thinking last March, last April, when we made the decision on the national insurance issue. So the last thing you want to be doing is taking more money out of people's take-home pay at exactly the point where they're being crucified by gas and electricity. And the second reason is that we now know that I was, if anything, understating it, and that they massively underreported the amount of revenue they're collecting. So they should just dismiss this immediately. I don't know why they want to break a manifesto pledge either. I was very proud of that part of the manifesto and used it a lot in my election campaign, so there's no way that I could vote to break.
Which takes me to the third area of our conversation, which I think it's really all about, and so too does the Times newspaper, and says as much in their leader. This is about what sort of Tory people are, if they are Tories, and it's about what the party stands for. You're either a tax-cutting, spending-reducing, manifesto-abiding politician, or you're a big-spending, chuck it all in there, and, you know, in difficult times the manifesto can rest. How it's resolved will tell us a great deal about the Tory party as we head for the general election.
Well, I don't think that can be true, because I haven't heard either the Prime Minister or the Chancellor say that they want to tear up the manifesto and dance on it. And I think what's happened here is that I think a dreadfully gloomy and pessimistic Treasury has tried to block perfectly sensible spending plans that the Prime Minister wanted, and then in desperation has said, well, if you're going to press on with having a better health service and having better social care, you've got to impose a separate additional tax. And I think a very foolish compromise was arrived at. And so I think it's about dissent at the top between Treasury and Number 10. And I want the Chancellor to remember that he always tells us, in public and private, that he's a low-tax Chancellor, to which my answer is, that's great, I want a low-tax Chancellor, but you at the moment, Chancellor, are a high-tax Chancellor, because you are the person pressing ahead with these massive increases in taxes, not just the national insurance, but a whole range of other taxes as well.
I accept all of that. I don't think I was saying that they danced on the manifesto, but there doesn't seem to cause them a great deal of anguish in just casting it aside. And people like...
It will.
OK. But when David
Coming
Frost...
soon to a polling institution near you, you know?
But when someone like David Frost leaves the Cabinet and cites it as being one of the reasons that he's gone from the Cabinet, many, many other reasons as well, it is this fundamental debate that your party needs to resolve one way or the other, whether it's a leadership election or the Boris Johnson seeing the light of day. Are you still a low-tax, low-spend party, or more as Robert Halfon tends to go along with, saying, no, we can spend all this money. If needs be, we could raise capital gains tax. We could even do levies on businesses, which I thought until last week was a Labour Party policy.
Well, I try to be a moderate in the middle. I mean, I do believe that free enterprise and lower tax rates is the way to have a more prosperous economy and more prosperous people. But I think one of the benefits of that is you actually collect more tax revenue. So I think this is a cake and eat it situation, where if you have the lower tax rates, people will keep more of their own money. But because they work harder and earn more, because there's incentive, and you get more rich people and successful businesses coming to Britain to do their thing and employ us, you end up with the double joy that people are better off and the state is better off as well. And it always works. Whenever the Conservatives have cut income tax, Labour has shrieked and howled and said you're helping the better off, and the state has ended up coining it in with far more revenue to spend on services. What's not to like?
John Redwood, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your thoughts on the NHS, its funding, and on the philosophy of taxation. Always a pleasure, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks for breaking in.
Lovely to see you, Alistair. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, John. So John Redwood there, Member of Parliament for Wokingham, with his thoughts on the NHS. Now, before we hear your thoughts on our big topic today, that rise in national insurance? And is it more about politics than it is about public health? In a moment, you'll hear my take. But let's listen back, in case you missed them, to a couple of my guests who spoke earlier on in the programme. First up, Richard Valtry, who's a doctor and former chair of the British Medical Association's GPs Committee. He told me the fundamental reason that the NHS needed funding via the rise, and here it is.
I think almost everybody recognises that the NHS has worked incredibly hard over the last 2 years responding to the pandemic, but whilst doing that, hasn't been able to do some of the routine things that we would expect to be done. Many of the operations, many of the procedures, many of the regular reviews that we do for patients have sadly had to be postponed, but they still need doing. And as a GP, I see in my surgery every day of the week patients who are waiting far too long for hip replacements, for knee joint replacements, for eye surgery, a whole range of different procedures. So the workforce has been underinvested in for many, many years. And the pandemic has shown that whilst the workforce that we have works incredibly hard, we do need more doctors, nurses, support staff right across the NHS and in general practice too. But additional resource to provide additional capacity, whether that be Saturday, Sundays, evening clinics, surgery appointments. We saw this over a decade ago, when there was huge waiting times, and the government then did create additional capacity at the time, again with a national insurance price to fund that. But we did see the waiting list drop dramatically by doing additional procedures on top of the extra work that the NHS continues to need to do. Yes, no, I think there is a recognition that this is urgent work that needs to be done. No one wants to see our patients waiting too long in pain or discomfort or with uncertainty and fear because their procedures or their appointments have been delayed. Everybody wants to get on with this, but we need that extra capacity to be able to do that, and we need the resources to support it. But we also need to recognise this is just the first bit of the jigsaw. We also, as GPs, see regularly the impact that our patients have when they're wanting to get support in care homes or home care, and the real financial concerns that they and their families have about that. So again, we need the government to act on their promise to resolve the problems in social care too, because that affects the NHS as well.
Julian Jessup used to work at the Treasury. He's now an independent economist, and he told me about the impact of long-term borrowing and the difference that it'll make in everyday life.
If you had to borrow more, then I'd be happy to do that. But in fact, you probably won't, because the economy has recovered more quickly than expected. People are actually already paying more in tax. So, wages are up, profits are up, spending is up. So the Treasury is already getting more money from the taxpayer because of the benefits of economic growth. So it doesn't need to add to that by topping up tax rates as well. And as you said in your introduction, this isn't just a tax that hits employees. Actually, most of the money initially would come from businesses, and they will inevitably pass that on to all of us in the form of lower wages or higher prices or less investment. So this is a pretty damaging tax, I think, at exactly the wrong time. The problem with the NHS, of course, is that it is potentially a black hole. It will swallow up however much money that you throw out to it. And there's a contrast here between the NHS, which obviously is state and publicly financed, with healthcare systems elsewhere in Europe and much of Asia, where there's much higher levels of private sector funding and provision. And those healthcare systems are much more successful. And this problem tends not to arise because the market decides what operations are going to be done, where the priorities lie. If it's just decided by bureaucrats in Whitehall or even doctors with the best will in the world, they're not necessarily going to allocate resources in the most effective way. So if you are going to go down the public funding route and taxpayers being expected to pay more, you need to get some sort of checks and balances there to make sure the money is spent well. And that's something I think in the past has often been missing.
Totally agree with that last point, checks and balances. My take? Well, I thought about this. I suspect the NHS needs more money, but to what end and how it would spend it, I genuinely don't know. I've listened to what Richard had to say about doing overtime and getting in the facilities, but its staff is at the pounding heart of it, and there aren't queues of people waiting to go and work for the NHS. And if you want to train a new nurse or doctor, it takes years. Few stand waiting to be recruited into the NHS, and training new blood takes time. Now, special units, a la Nightingale units, could offer facilities and be fitted out with lovely new kit, but to be staffed by whom? I just don't know. Long term, I think we need a rethink about how the NHS is funded and what it does. Little will go to care from that tax rise if it does happen, which is in a real crisis too. But that's another argument we've had on this programme many, many times. Their big review settled very little in truth. Now, all of that said, if the NHS does need more money, and even Sir John Redwood said, yes, it probably does, although there are other areas of activity that are unwinding and that'll yield great amounts of money, national insurance is the least progressive tax. It only hits workers and employers. It has a cut-off at the top end. Those living on investment income and rental income are untouched by it. If there's more money in the government kitty than expected, as Sir John Redwood pointed out, then shouldn't contingency reserves be rebuilt? We may be about to be engaged in military conflict. We may have another pandemic. Borrowing reduced, deficits cut. Isn't that what the Tories used to be about? Boris Johnson seems to think that sticking to higher national insurance and more money for the NHS is a part of his recovery and survival plan. I wonder, when those pay slips come in the late spring and early summer, if he doesn't survive and there is a leadership election, I suspect that the candidate of the right will argue against the rise and just pumping more money into the NHS, and the candidate of the left will argue quite the opposite. The party really does need that debate, with or without a leadership election. It's at the heart of the choice that we all face when that even more important vote comes along, the general election. Let's start with your thoughts from Mark. It's going to take a monumental change to produce a proper health service for the country. And while stubbornness from political groups, unions and part of the population exists, things will never change and everything will just get worse, and everyone complaining that their hard-earned cash is being taxed more and more. That's why I said a rethink, Mark. This one's from Helen. I don't want another penny of taxpayers' money thrown at the NHS until there is a plan to eliminate not just the eye-watering waste, the cost of theft, health tourism, money is simply not recouped, etc., but also the ludicrous layer of middle management, including the totally redundant diversity departments. The NHS should be streamlined and concerned with health only. And finally, an email from Joy. Any finances should have conditions and ceilings attached to any remuneration. Gosh, you listened. We've run out of time. My apologies for that. It is indeed 4 minutes to 2, and it's all we have time for today. But I will be back tomorrow at midday, where we'll be discussing Ukraine and Russia's involvement. So see you tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
So looking ahead then to this afternoon, and the UK looking windy with gales for the northern half of the UK and rain clearing south. Looking at the detail, Saturday afternoon rather cloudy and mild across the southwest of England, a fresh westerly wind, spells of rain and drizzle. The moors also seeing a fair amount of low cloud shrouding the summits. A cloudy afternoon for London and the southeast, drier than further west, windy with highs of 12 to 14. Cloudy, wet and windy in Wales, particularly in Cardiff, although clearer skies not far away. Staying mild, highs there of 9 to 11 Celsius. And then looking further up the country to Manchester and the northwest, it's going to be windy with sunny spells and showers, a risk of gales over the moors, so take care on those busy roads. A similar story for northeast England, where strong and gusty winds will make for potentially difficult driving conditions, especially through the first part of the afternoon. Dry with sunny spills there. And a windy afternoon for Glasgow and the central belt, with temperatures lower than those in the day, thanks to the cold air moving in on the strong northwesterly wind. And moving across to Northern Ireland, a similar picture there for the afternoon, with winds having weakened somewhat after